Her husband died, but the secret he left behind led her to a hidden war guarded by a Navy SEAL and his dog. After 40 years of marriage, Hannah Whitaker thought grief would be the hardest part, but the silence inside her home was worse. When she uncovers a deed to a forgotten cabin deep in the Rockies, she leaves everything behind. What waits for her there isn't peace, but a man, a war, and a loyal K9 who already knows her name. Comment 1 or 0 and tell me where you're watching from. The clock on the kitchen wall had not stopped. It ticked with the same steady rhythm it always had. Measured, patient, indifferent. But to Hannah Whitaker, it sounded louder now. Louder than the hum of the refrigerator. Louder than the distant traffic beyond her quiet Tennessee neighborhood. Louder than her own breathing. Tick, tick, tick. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded loosely in front of her, staring at the place across from her where her husband used to sit. The chair was still pulled out slightly, just as he had left it that last morning. It had been 4 months. 4 months since Daniel Whitaker had walked into that hospital room and never walked back out again. Hannah had not moved the chair. She told herself it was because she hadn't gotten around to it yet. But deep down, she knew the truth. Moving it would mean accepting that no one was coming back to sit there. The house still smelled faintly of him. Not strongly. Not enough to comfort. Just enough to remind. 40 years of marriage had a way of settling into walls, into floors, into the grain of wooden cabinets and the worn fabric of chairs. It lingered in quiet ways, invisible, but undeniable. Every corner held something. The living room still carried the indentation on the couch where Daniel used to fall asleep every Sunday afternoon, the television murmuring low in the background. The hallway floor creaked in the same spot where he had always stepped a little too hard. The bedroom door still stuck slightly at the top, just like it always had, because he had said he'd fix it one day. He never did. And now, the house felt wrong. Not empty, no, empty would have been easier. It felt full. Full of things that weren't there anymore. Hannah reached for the coffee mug in front of her. It had gone cold an hour ago, but she lifted it anyway, took a small sip, then set it back down without tasting it. Her eyes drifted again to the chair. She imagined him there. Not clearly. Not like before. Just a shadow of a presence. A habit her mind hadn't yet broken. She waited. For what, she didn't know. Maybe for him to speak. Maybe for the clock to stop. Maybe for something inside her to shift, to click into place and tell her what to do next. But nothing came. Only the ticking. After a while, she pushed her chair back slowly and stood. The motion felt heavier than it should have, as though the air itself resisted change. She moved through the kitchen, her hand brushing lightly along the counter, her fingers tracing familiar grooves and edges. She had cleaned this kitchen thousands of times. She knew every inch of it without thinking. Today, it felt like someone else's house. Or worse. A museum of a life that had already ended. She paused at the doorway leading into the hallway, her gaze drifting toward the small office Daniel had used for paperwork and repairs. The door was half open. She hadn't gone in there much since he passed. There had been too many things, too many pieces of him still sitting exactly where he'd left them. But something about the stillness of the morning, the unbearable sameness of it, pushed her forward. She stepped into the room. Dust motes floated in the thin beam of light coming through the window, drifting slowly like time itself had thickened in the air. His desk sat against the wall, papers stacked neatly in one corner, tools arranged with quiet precision in another. Daniel had always been a careful man, not obsessive, just deliberate. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. Hannah walked to the desk and rested her hand on its surface. The wood was smooth beneath her fingers, worn slightly where his arms used to rest. She pulled out the chair and sat down. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached for the top drawer. It opened easily. Inside were documents, bills, receipts, old warranty papers, insurance forms. Nothing unexpected, nothing that required her attention. She closed it and opened the next. More of the same. The third drawer stuck slightly, and she had to pull harder than she expected. It came open with a soft jerk. That was where she saw it. A folder. Plain. Brown. Unlabeled. It sat at the back of the drawer, tucked beneath a stack of older documents as if it had been placed there intentionally, but not meant to be found easily. Hannah frowned slightly. Daniel had never been secretive. Not in any way that mattered. He had his quiet moments, yes. Parts of himself he kept to himself. But never anything like this. She reached in and pulled the folder out. It felt heavier than it should have. She set it on the desk in front of her and stared at it for a few seconds before opening it. Inside was a single document. A property deed. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, reading each line with careful attention, as if expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something more familiar. They didn't. The address meant nothing to her. A remote parcel of land in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. 2 acres. A single structure listed as a cabin. Ownership registered under Daniel Whitaker. For nearly 20 years. 20 years. Hannah blinked. That couldn't be right. She read it again. Then again. The numbers didn't change. Her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the paper. 20 years. She leaned back in the chair, the quiet of the room pressing in around her. In 40 years of marriage, Daniel had never once mentioned a cabin in Colorado. Not once. Not in passing. Not in stories. Not in plans. Nothing. Hannah waited for anger to come. It didn't. She expected betrayal, confusion, some sharp emotional edge that would give shape to what she was feeling. But what came instead was something else. Something quieter. Something deeper. Curiosity. Not the light, passing kind. The kind that settles in your chest and doesn't leave. The kind that feels inevitable. She looked around the room again, at the tools, the papers, the quiet order of a man who had lived carefully and intentionally. Daniel had not been careless. If this existed, if he had kept it for 20 years, then it mattered. Hannah lowered her gaze back to the deed. Her thumb traced the edge of the paper slowly. The address, the mountains, the cabin. A place she had never seen. A place that had belonged to her husband for half their marriage, without her ever knowing. She sat there for a long time. The clock in the kitchen continued its steady ticking, faint but constant through the walls. Tick, tick, tick. For the first time in months, something inside her shifted. Not relief, not peace, but movement, a direction. She folded the document carefully and placed it back into the folder. Then she stood. The house didn't feel any less heavy. The memories didn't fade. The silence didn't break. But there was something else now. A thread. A question that refused to let go. Hannah walked back into the kitchen and looked once more at the empty chair across the table. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet. I think I need to go see it. The words sounded strange in the still air, but they felt right. She turned away before she could change her mind. Upstairs, she pulled a suitcase from the closet. Not a large one, just enough. She packed slowly, carefully. as if each item she chose mattered more than it used to. Clothes, a few personal things. The silver necklace Daniel had given her years ago, simple, oval-shaped, worn smooth with time. She slipped it into her hand for a moment, then fastened it around her neck. She didn't know why. It just felt like she should. By afternoon, the suitcase was by the door. Hannah stood in the living room, taking in the house one last time. Not as a final goodbye. Not yet. But as something paused, suspended. The light through the windows had begun to shift, casting long shadows across the floor. She walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. The air felt different, cooler, lighter, or maybe she was just breathing differently. She locked the door behind her. The click echoed faintly. Then she walked to her car, placed the suitcase in the trunk, and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, she didn't start the engine. She just sat there, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, looking ahead, at nothing in particular, at everything at once, je suppose. Then, slowly, she turned the key. The engine came to life, and with it, something else. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of something that might, one day, become it. Hannah Whitaker pulled out of the driveway and began to drive west, toward a place she had never seen, toward a life she did not understand, toward a truth her husband had carried alone for 20 years. And for the first time since he was gone, she wasn't standing still anymore. The road stretched ahead of Hannah Whitaker in a long, unbroken line of gray, disappearing into the soft haze of late afternoon. The familiar neighborhoods of Tennessee faded behind her mile by mile, subdivisions turning into open fields, fields giving way to stretches of highway that felt increasingly detached from the life she had known. At first, the drive felt ordinary. Gas stations, billboards, passing cars moving in steady rhythm. But somewhere past the state line, something began to change. The traffic thinned. The radio signal grew weaker, slipping in and out until it dissolved into static. Hannah reached forward and turned it off, letting the silence fill the car. It didn't feel uncomfortable the way silence had felt inside the house. This silence was different. It didn't press in. It opened up. She drove through Kentucky, then Missouri, then further west, watching the land slowly reshape itself. The wide, flat stretches of farmland gave way to rolling hills, then sharper inclines, then distant blue-gray outlines rising against the horizon. Mountains. Real ones. By the second day, the roads narrowed. The smooth highways she had relied on for hours turned into two-lane roads that curved gently at first, then more sharply, winding through rising terrain. The trees changed too, taller, denser, darker green. Pines began to replace the softer foliage she was used to. Her phone lost service completely sometime mid-morning. She checked it twice out of habit. No signal, no messages, no connection. For a moment, a flicker of unease passed through her. Then she set the phone down on the passenger seat and kept driving. The sky above the mountains felt different, wider somehow, cleaner. The light sharper, casting long shadows that moved quickly across the uneven ground as the sun shifted westward. She stopped once at a small roadside diner perched near a bend in the road. It was the kind of place that didn't advertise itself. A simple wooden sign, a gravel lot. 2 pickup trucks parked out front, dust clinging to their tires. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and something frying. A woman behind the counter glanced up as Hannah entered. Her expression wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was measured, observant. "You passing through?" the woman asked. Hannah hesitated for just a second. "I think so," she said. The woman nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something she already suspected. Hannah ordered coffee and sat by the window. From there, she could see the road Trofosero curling away between the trees, disappearing into deeper mountain country. It looked less like a path people traveled, and more like a place you ended up when you had nowhere else to go. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug and stared out at it. The question she had been holding back finally surfaced. Why hadn't Daniel told her? Not once. Not in 20 years. The thought came without anger. Just wait. He had shared everything else with her, every plan, every worry, every quiet thought at the end of long days. But not this. Not this place. Hannah took a slow sip of her coffee. It had cooled already. Outside, one of the men from the trucks glanced toward the diner window. Their eyes met for just a moment before he looked away. It wasn't a threatening look, but it wasn't casual either. It was the kind of look that noticed and remembered. Hannah felt it settle in the back of her mind as she finished her coffee, paid, and stepped back out into the mountain air. Cooler now, thinner. The road after the diner changed again. The asphalt gave way to a rougher surface, then eventually to gravel. Her car shifted slightly beneath her as the tires adjusted, the sound of small stones crackling under the weight of the vehicle. Dust lifted behind her in a pale cloud. She slowed her speed. The turns became tighter. The forest pressed closer to the road, tall pines rising like silent walls on either side. Their branches stretched overhead in places, dimming the light until it felt like she was passing through long corridors of shadow and green. No signs, no markers, no indication she was headed anywhere at all. Only the address Daniel had left behind, and the quiet certainty pulling her forward. After several miles, the road dipped suddenly into a shallow valley. The trees opened just enough to reveal it. A small settlement, not a town. Not in any official sense. Just a scattering of structures, maybe a dozen or so, spread unevenly across a wide clearing. A few cabins, a barn, a small building that might have been a general store or a meeting hall. Smoke rose from one chimney, curling slowly into the fading light. Hannah eased her foot off the gas. This was it. She knew it without needing to check. The place Daniel had never mentioned. The place he had kept for 20 years. The place she had driven across half the country to find. She pulled her car to the side of the road and let the engine idle for a moment. The silence here was different from anywhere she had ever known. It wasn't empty, it was aware, as if the valley itself held its breath. She turned off the engine. The sudden stillness rang in her ears. For a moment she just sat there, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her eyes scanning the quiet scene before her. Movement caught her attention. A man stood near one of the cabins, leaning lightly against a wooden post. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just watching. Another figure appeared near the barn, an older woman, her posture straight despite her age. She paused, looking in Hannah's direction without stepping closer. They didn't wave. They didn't call out. They simply observed. Hannah stepped out of the car. The air was colder than she expected. Crisp. Clean. It carried the scent of pine and earth and something else, something faintly metallic she couldn't quite place. She closed the car door quietly. The sound echoed more than it should have. She felt it then. Not hostility, not exactly, but something close to recognition, as if her presence here wasn't a surprise, as if it had been anticipated. She took a few steps forward, gravel crunching beneath her shoes. No one approached. No one spoke. The man by the cabin straightened slightly, his gaze steady, measuring. Hannah felt a question form in her chest. Had Daniel been here? Recently? No, that couldn't be. 4 months. Still, there was something in the way they looked at her. Not curiosity, not confusion, expectation. A quiet certainty that she belonged here, even if she didn't yet understand why. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying a low whisper across the valley. Hannah turned slowly, taking in the full view of the place. The cabins, the forest, the long stretch of land rising toward the mountains beyond. Somewhere up there, somewhere beyond what she could see, was the cabin Daniel had left her, the cabin he had never spoken of, the place that had waited for her in silence for 20 years. She looked back at the people in the clearing, still watching, still saying nothing. And for the first time since she had started this journey, a thought settled into her mind with quiet, undeniable weight. She hadn't just found this place. This place had been waiting for her. The thought stayed with Hannah as she climbed back into her car, her hands slower now, more deliberate. The quiet valley did not move toward her, did not greet her, did not ask questions. It simply allowed her to be there. She drove forward again, easing past the small cluster of buildings. No one stepped into her path. No one waved her down. But she felt their eyes follow her as she passed. Not suspicious, not welcoming, just certain. The gravel road continued beyond the settlement, narrowing further as it curved along the base of a rising slope. The trees grew thicker here, taller, their branches weaving together overhead until the sky became a thin strip of pale blue. The light dimmed. Hannah slowed the car even more, her fingers tightening slightly on the wheel as she followed the path. The address Daniel had left was simple. No directions, no markers, nothing to guide her except distance and instinct. And somehow, instinct felt enough. After another half-mile, she saw it. The cabin. It stood alone, set back from the road just enough to feel separate from everything else. A single-story structure of dark wood, weathered but intact. A narrow porch stretched across the front, and a small stack of firewood sat neatly against one side. It didn't look abandoned. It looked maintained. Hannah pulled the car to a stop. For a moment, she didn't get out. She just sat there, staring. This was it. The place Daniel had kept hidden for 20 years. The place he had come to without her. Her chest tightened, not with anger, but with something more complicated. Something she couldn't name. She opened the door and stepped out. The air here felt colder than it had in the valley below. The trees pressed closer, the silence deeper, broken only by the faint rustle of wind through pine needles. Her footsteps sounded louder than they should have as she walked toward the cabin. Up close, she could see small details. The hinges on the door had been oiled recently. The wood on the porch had been repaired in places, newer boards set carefully beside older ones. Someone had been here. Recently. Hannah stopped at the base of the porch steps. A flicker of unease moved through her. Had Daniel arranged for someone to take care of this place? Or... A sound broke the silence. Soft, deliberate, behind her. Hannah turned. At the edge of the tree line, where shadow met the last of the fading daylight, a figure stood. Still. Watching. Her breath caught slightly as her eyes adjusted. A man. Tall, lean, standing with a kind of stillness that didn't feel casual. He wore a dark jacket, worn at the edges, and his posture was straight, not rigid, but controlled, disciplined. There was something about the way he held himself that felt different, like he was always aware of where he stood, of what surrounded him, of what might happen next. Hannah's gaze shifted slightly, and that's when she saw the dog. A German shepherd stood at his side, just a step ahead of him, larger than most she had seen. His coat was a mix of black and gray, thick and roughened in places. One ear carried a faint notch, and a scar ran along the side of his muzzle. The dog's eyes were fixed on her, not aggressive, not uncertain, focused, as if he already knew her. Hannah felt something shift in her chest again. The man stepped forward slowly, moving out of the shadows just enough for the last light of evening to catch his face. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. His features were sharp, weathered, his expression neutral but not empty. There was a weight in his eyes, not anger, not suspicion, something deeper, something carried. They stood there for a moment, facing each other in silence. Then he spoke. "You made it." His voice was low, steady, not surprised, certain. Hannah blinked slightly. I think so," she said, her voice softer than she expected. The dog took a step forward. Hannah tensed instinctively, but the man gave a subtle signal, a small movement of his hand, and the dog stopped immediately. Obedient, precise. Hannah noticed that. The man stepped closer, closing part of the distance between them. Not enough to crowd her, but enough that she could see him clearly now. "My name's Caleb," he said. "Caleb Rourke." He didn't offer a hand. Hannah hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Hannah Whitaker." Caleb's eyes held hers for a second longer than most people would allow. Then he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I know." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight. Hannah felt it. "You knew my husband?" she asked. Caleb's expression didn't change much, but something in his posture shifted. A slight tightening, a controlled response. "Yeah," he said. "I knew Daniel." Hannah searched his face. "How?" The question came out more direct than she intended. Caleb glanced briefly toward the cabin, then back at her. "We worked together," he said. It wasn't an explanation. Not really. Hannah waited for more. It didn't come. The dog moved again, stepping forward slowly this time, his head lowering slightly as he approached her. Hannah froze. Caleb didn't stop him. "Atlas," he said quietly. The name fit. The dog stopped a few feet from Hannah, studying her with those same focused eyes. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. Hannah held her breath. Atlas lifted his nose slightly, catching her scent. For a moment, everything went still. Then, unexpectedly, the dog's posture softened. His tail moved once. Just once. A small, controlled motion. Recognition. Hannah felt her chest tighten again. "He knows me?" she said, barely above a whisper. Caleb watched the interaction carefully. "Yeah," he said. "He does." Hannah looked at the dog. Atlas didn't look away. It wasn't the way animals usually looked at strangers. There was no hesitation, no testing, just quiet certainty. "How?" she asked. Caleb exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting briefly toward the trees behind him, then back to her. "Daniel brought something of yours up here once," he said. "A jacket. Atlas trained on your scent." Hannah's breath caught. "Why would he?" She stopped. The question didn't finish, because something in Caleb's expression told her he wasn't going to answer it. Not yet. The silence stretched again, longer this time. Hannah felt it pressing in. There were too many questions, too many pieces that didn't fit. Her husband, this man, this dog. This place. None of it made sense. Not yet. Caleb shifted his weight slightly, as if making a decision. If you're here, he said, his voice quieter now, then something's already started. Hannah frowned. What does that mean? Caleb held her gaze for a moment. Then he shook his head just slightly. Means you didn't come here by accident. That's not an answer. No, he said, it's not. The honesty in it caught her off guard. He wasn't trying to comfort her. He wasn't trying to explain things away. He was simply stating what he knew and holding back what he didn't or wouldn't. Atlas stepped closer again, this time brushing lightly against Hannah's leg. The contact was brief, gentle, but it sent a quiet, unexpected warmth through her. She looked down at him. He stayed there, steady, calm, as if anchoring her. Caleb noticed. He's got a good read on people, he said. Hannah let out a slow breath. I hope he's right, she said. Caleb's expression shifted, just slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. He stepped back, giving her space again. You should get inside, he said. It gets colder up here after dark. Hannah nodded. She turned toward the cabin, her hand reaching for the porch railing. Then she paused, looked back. Caleb? He was already moving toward the tree line. He stopped. Yeah? She hesitated. There's a lot I don't understand. He nodded once. I know. She waited. He didn't move. Are you going to tell me? She asked. Caleb studied her for a long second. Then he shook his head. Not yet. The answer should have frustrated her, but somehow, it didn't. Why not? Caleb glanced briefly at Atlas, then back at her. Because if Daniel wanted you to know, he said, he would have told you. Hannah felt the weight of that settle in. Then Caleb added more quietly, and if he didn't, there was a reason. The words stayed with her as he turned and walked back into the trees. Atlas hesitated for a moment, then followed. The forest swallowed them both quickly, the shadows closing in until it was as if they had never been there at all. Hannah stood alone again in front of the cabin, but the silence didn't feel the same. Not empty, not heavy, charged, as if something had shifted. She turned back toward the door, stepped onto the porch, reached for the handle, and this time, she didn't hesitate. Hannah turned the handle and pushed the door open. The hinges moved smoothly, too smoothly for a place that had supposedly been sitting unused. The door gave way without resistance, revealing a dim interior touched by the last light of evening. The air inside carried a faint scent of wood, ash, and something older. Not decay, but stillness. A space that had been closed, but not forgotten. Hannah stepped inside. The floorboards creaked softly beneath her weight. Not weak, just aware. She paused just inside the doorway, letting her eyes adjust. The cabin was simple. One main room, a stone fireplace along the far wall, a wooden table near the center, 2 chairs tucked neatly beneath it, a small kitchen area off to the side, stocked with only the basics. But everything was in place. Not dusty, not abandoned, maintained. The firewood stacked by the wall had been cut recently. The metal kettle near the stove showed no signs of rust. Even the windows, though slightly clouded by age, were intact and sealed tight. Someone had been here. Hannah stepped further in, closing the door behind her. The sound echoed quietly through the cabin, settling into the corners like a breath held too long. She moved slowly, her fingers brushing along the table's edge. This wasn't forgotten, she murmured. Her voice sounded strange in the space, not unwelcome, just new. She crossed to the fireplace. The stonework was solid, carefully built. Her eyes moved across it, taking in the details, until something caught her attention. A slight discoloration along the base, not obvious, but not random either. She crouched down, running her hand along the edge of one of the lower stones. It didn't move, but something about it felt different. Before she could press further, a sound came from outside. Soft, measured. Hannah turned quickly. Her breath caught. A shadow moved past the window. Then, a low, familiar shape appeared at the door. Atlas. The German shepherd stood on the porch, his head slightly lowered, eyes fixed on her through the glass. For a moment, Hannah didn't move. Then she stepped forward and opened the door again. Atlas didn't rush in. He waited, just outside the threshold. "Hey," Hannah said softly. The dog stepped inside slowly, his paws silent on the wooden floor. He moved with purpose, not exploring, not uncertain, focused. Hannah closed the door behind him, watching carefully. Atlas didn't look at her, not at first. He moved past her, crossing the room directly toward the fireplace. Then he stopped, right in front of it. His body stiffened slightly, his ears tilted forward. And then he scratched. Once. Twice. A low, controlled motion against the stone. Hannah frowned. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Atlas didn't look back. He lowered his nose, sniffing along the base of the fireplace, tracing a line across the stone as if following something invisible. Then he let out a soft sound. Not a bark, not a growl, a low, almost impatient whine. Hannah felt a ripple of unease move through her. "He did this before," she whispered. She didn't know why she said it, but the thought came clearly. She stepped closer. Atlas shifted slightly to the side, making space for her. Deliberate, inviting. Hannah crouched down again, her fingers pressing against the stone where Atlas had been scratching. She pushed harder this time. Nothing. She tried the edges. Still nothing. "It's solid," she said. Atlas let out another soft sound. Then he did something different. He stepped forward and nudged her hand. Firm, insistent. Hannah blinked. "What?" Atlas nudged again, this time guiding her hand slightly to the left, a different section of stone. Hannah followed the movement, pressed again. This time, there was a faint shift, barely noticeable, but real. She froze, then pressed harder. The stone gave slightly under her weight. Not falling. Not breaking. Moving. Hannah's heart began to pound. "No way!" She adjusted her grip, pushing upward and inward at the same time. The stone slid. Just enough. A hidden seam revealed itself. Atlas stepped back, watching. Hannah used both hands now, pulling carefully. The stone lifted. Heavy, but manageable. Behind it, a hollow space. Dark. Hidden. Hannah stared at it for a long moment, her breath shallow. "This isn't real," she whispered. But it was. She reached inside slowly. Her fingers brushed against something. Wood. She pulled it out. A small box. Simple. Worn. Locked. Hannah sat back on her heels, staring at it. Atlas lowered himself to the floor beside her, calm now. Certain. As if this was exactly what he had been waiting for. Hannah ran her fingers over the surface of the box. There was no label, no marking, just age and purpose. "How did you know?" she asked softly, looking at the dog. Atlas didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The answer wasn't in him. It was in Daniel. Hannah felt it then. Not just curiosity anymore. Something deeper. Something pulling her forward. She set the box carefully on the table and stood. Her legs felt slightly unsteady. The room seemed different now. Not quiet. Not empty. Full. Full of something hidden. Full of something waiting. She moved toward the small bedroom area, scanning for anything that might help open the box. A key, a tool, anything. But before she could search further, a knock. Sharp. Controlled. Hannah froze. Her eyes snapped toward the door. Another knock. This time slightly louder. Atlas was already on his feet. Alert. Still. Focused. Hannah walked slowly to the door and opened it. Caleb stood on the porch, exactly where she had last seen him, as if he had never left. His eyes moved past her, scanning the interior quickly. Then they settled on her face. "You found it," he said. Not a question, a statement. Hannah's pulse quickened. "You knew it was here," she said. Caleb stepped inside without waiting for permission. Atlas moved aside immediately, allowing him through. Caleb's gaze landed on the open stone, then the box on the table. He exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I knew." Hannah crossed her arms slightly. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He walked to the table, stopping just short of the box. His posture shifted slightly, less guarded, more reflective. "Because it wasn't mine to tell," he said. Hannah felt frustration rise. "This is my husband we're talking about," she said. "I think I deserve—" "You do," Caleb interrupted quietly. The tone stopped her, not harsh, but firm. "You deserve to know," he continued. "Just not from me." Hannah stared at him. "Then who?" Caleb nodded toward the box. "That's where it starts." The words hung in the air. Hannah looked back at the box, then at the open space in the fireplace, then at Atlas. Everything connected in a way she didn't fully understand yet, but she felt it. Caleb stepped back slightly, giving her space again. "Whatever's in there," he said. "Daniel wanted you to find it yourself." Hannah swallowed. Her hand moved slowly toward the box, not opening it yet, just resting on top. It felt heavier than it should, like it carried more than just wood and metal, like it carried answers and questions and something else, something she wasn't ready to name. She looked up at Caleb. "Is this why you said something already started?" Caleb met her gaze. "Yes." Hannah's breath slowed. "What happens next?" Caleb glanced at Atlas, then back at her. "That depends on you." The room fell silent again, but this silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. And for the first time since she arrived, Hannah realized something that changed everything. She hadn't just come here to find answers. She had come here to unlock them. The thought settled deep in Hannah's chest, heavier than anything she had carried since leaving Tennessee. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It wasn't even grief. It was something else. Responsibility. She looked down at the wooden box resting beneath her hand. It didn't look extraordinary. No markings, no carvings, just worn edges and a small, simple lock at the front. but everything about it felt deliberate, like it had been waiting. Caleb stood across the table, silent now. He didn't reach for the box, didn't offer help, didn't move closer. Atlas remained at Hannah's side, seated but alert, his eyes fixed on the object as if he understood its importance in a way no one else in the room could. Hannah drew in a slow breath. "Do you know what's inside?" she asked. Caleb shook his head once. "No." "You never opened it?" "No." "Why not?" Caleb's gaze didn't shift. "Because it wasn't mine." The answer was simple. Final. Hannah nodded slowly. That was Daniel, always precise about what belonged to him and what didn't. Her fingers moved to the lock. Small, metal, unremarkable. But something about it tugged at her memory. She frowned slightly, studying it more closely. Oval shape, a narrow seam along its edge. Her hand instinctively rose to her chest, to the necklace, the silver pendant Daniel had given her years ago. She hadn't thought about it much when she packed. It had just felt right to bring it. Now, her fingers closed around it. She pulled it gently away from her neck and looked at it in the dim cabin light. Simple, smooth, worn from years of being touched without thought. But now, she saw it differently. There was a faint line along the edge, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Her breath slowed. "No," she whispered. Caleb didn't move. Atlas shifted slightly, his ears tilting forward. Hannah turned the pendant in her fingers. Then, carefully, she pressed along the seam. At first, nothing happened. Then, a soft click. The pendant opened. Hannah's heart skipped. Inside, a small metal piece, precisely shaped, cold against her fingertips. She stared at it. For a long moment, she didn't breathe. "He gave me this 15 years ago," she said, her voice barely steady. "I wore it every day." Caleb's expression remained controlled, but something in his eyes shifted. "Looks like he gave you more than a necklace." Hannah swallowed. Her hand trembled slightly as she brought the metal piece closer to the box. It fit. Perfectly. No hesitation. No adjustment. As if it had always belonged there. She paused. Just for a second. Then turned it. The lock clicked open. The sound echoed softly through the cabin. Final. Unavoidable. Hannah lifted the lid. Inside, carefully arranged. Tools. Small, intricate, precisely crafted. Not common tools. Specialized. Each piece fitted into its own place, secured tightly as if prepared for travel or long-term storage. Underneath them, folded papers, maps, and a thick, worn notebook. Hannah's hands moved slowly now, almost reverently, as she lifted the top layer of tools aside. She picked up the notebook, opened it. Her breath caught. Daniel's handwriting. There was no mistaking it. Clean. Measured. Deliberate. Page after page filled with sketches, notes, diagrams. At first glance, they made little sense. Lines, angles, symbols. But then, patterns emerged. Water flow, channels, pressure points. Underground pathways mapped with a level of detail that went far beyond casual observation. "This isn't normal," Hannah said. Caleb stepped closer now, his eyes scanning the pages. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." Hannah turned another page, then another. Her fingers tightened slightly. "This is engineering," she said. "But not for a building. Not for something above ground." Caleb nodded. "It's a system." "For what?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the box and pulled out one of the folded maps. He spread it carefully across the table. Hannah leaned in. It was the valley. Every part of it. The settlement, the surrounding forest, the ridges, marked with the same symbols she had seen in the notebook. Connected, layered, deliberate. And at the center, the cabin, her cabin. Hannah felt her pulse rise. "This is all connected," she said. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "Yeah." She looked up at him. "You knew about this?" It wasn't a question. Caleb held her gaze. "I knew parts of it." "Parts?" "He didn't tell me everything." Hannah let out a slow breath. "What did he tell you?" Caleb's eyes dropped briefly to the map, then back to her. "That this valley needed protection." "From what?" "From people who'd see it as something to use, instead of something to keep." Hannah frowned. "That doesn't explain this." She gestured to the diagrams, the maps, the tools. Caleb nodded. "No, it doesn't." He placed his hand lightly on the map. "Daniel built something here," he said. "Piece by piece, over years." Hannah's voice dropped. "What kind of something?" Caleb met her eyes. "A system." "For what?" There was a pause, a long one. Then Caleb answered. "To control the water." The words landed heavy. Hannah blinked. "Control? What water?" Caleb tapped the map. "These mountains sit on something most people don't know about," he said. "Underground springs, natural reservoirs, enough to sustain this whole valley, even if everything else dries up." Hannah's chest tightened. "And he built this? To manage that?" Caleb nodded. "Not just manage it. Protect it." "From who?" Caleb's gaze shifted toward the window, toward the darkening forest beyond. "Anyone who comes looking for it." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the air heavier. Hannah looked back down at the notebook, at the careful lines, the years of work, the quiet dedication of a man she thought she knew completely. "This is why he came here," she said softly. Caleb didn't respond, because he didn't need to. Hannah turned another page, and that's when she saw it. A final entry, different from the others, less technical, more personal. Her breath slowed as she read. "If you're reading this, Hannah, then it means you came. And if you came, then it means it's time." Her hands tightened on the page. "He knew," she whispered. Caleb watched her closely. "Knew what?" Hannah looked up, her eyes wide with something between realization and disbelief. "That I'd find this," she said. "That I'd come here." Caleb's expression didn't change, but his voice when he spoke was quieter. "Yeah." Hannah's gaze dropped back to the page. Her husband had built this, over years. In silence. Not to hide from her, but to prepare something. For her. The truth settled slowly, heavy, unavoidable. This wasn't just a secret. It was a plan, and she had just stepped into the middle of it. Hannah closed the notebook slowly, her fingers lingering on the worn cover as if it might still hold warmth from Daniel's hands. The room had changed, or maybe she had. The cabin no longer felt like a quiet place hidden in the mountains. It felt like a center point, a place where things connected, where decisions had been made long before she ever knew she would need to make one herself. She looked up at Caleb. "You said he didn't tell you everything," she said. Caleb leaned back slightly against the edge of the table, his arms resting loosely at his sides. He didn't look surprised by the question. "He told me enough," he said. "That's not the same thing." "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not." Hannah studied him more closely now. There was something she hadn't fully allowed herself to see before. Not just the quiet. Not just the control. Something underneath it. A tension. A constant awareness that didn't turn off. She had seen it in people before. Soldiers on television. Men interviewed after coming home from war. The way they scanned rooms. The way they held still without ever truly relaxing. Caleb carried that. Even here. Even now. "How did you meet him?" she asked. Caleb's gaze shifted slightly, not away from her, but somewhere inward. "About 8 years ago," he said. "I was already living up here." "You lived here alone?" "Mostly." Hannah nodded. "That's when he came?" Caleb exhaled slowly. "Yeah. Said he needed help with something mechanical. That's how it started." Hannah frowned. "Mechanical?" Caleb gestured toward the notebook. "The system, the channels, the control points. He had the designs, I had the time. And you just agreed to help?" Caleb's mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "Didn't feel like I had much else to do." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Hannah felt it. "What were you doing before that?" she asked gently. Caleb didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Atlas shifted slightly at his side, moving closer, his body brushing lightly against Caleb's leg. The gesture was small, but it meant something. Caleb reached down without looking and rested his hand briefly on the dog's neck, grounding. Then he looked back at Hannah. "I was in the Navy," he said. Hannah nodded slowly. "I figured." "SEAL team," Caleb added. The room seemed to tighten slightly around the words. Hannah's breath slowed. "How long?" "Long enough." "And then?" Caleb's gaze drifted again, this time toward the window, where the last light of evening had faded into a deeper shade of blue. "Then I came home." The way he said it made the phrase feel incomplete. Hannah noticed. "That doesn't sound like the whole story." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "It's the part that matters." Hannah held his gaze. "And the part that doesn't?" Another pause. Longer this time. Atlas shifted again, pressing slightly closer. Caleb's hand remained on him. "He didn't tell you everything," Caleb said finally. "I don't either." Hannah felt a flicker of frustration, but it didn't take hold. Because she understood something now. This wasn't avoidance. It was control. Measured. Deliberate. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then tell me what does matter." Caleb studied her for a moment. Then he straightened slightly, his posture shifting into something more focused. "What matters," he said, "is that I wasn't doing much of anything when Daniel found me." Hannah listened. "He showed up here with plans," Caleb continued. "Not just ideas, real designs, calculations. He knew exactly what he wanted to build. And you helped him." Caleb nodded. "At first, yeah, just the basics. Digging, reinforcing, setting up the first control points." Hannah glanced at the notebook. "This took years." "Yeah." "Why?" Caleb's eyes met hers again. "Because it wasn't just about building it." "Then what was it about?" Caleb hesitated, then answered, making sure it lasted. The words settled into the room, heavy. Hannah felt something shift again. Daniel hadn't just built something complicated. He had built something meant to outlive him. Did anyone else know? She asked. Caleb shook his head. Not the full picture. The people in the valley? They know enough, Caleb said. Enough to trust it. Enough to protect it. But not how it works. Hannah nodded slowly. And you? I know more than most. But not everything. No. Hannah looked down at the notebook again. He left the rest for me, she said quietly. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth of it was already clear. Hannah closed the notebook again, her fingers pressing lightly against the cover. I don't understand something, she said. Caleb waited. Why me? She asked. Why not you? You've been here. You helped him build it. Caleb's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes shifted. He didn't trust me with it. Hannah blinked. That doesn't make sense. It does, Caleb said. How? Caleb looked down briefly at Atlas, then back at her. Because I don't stay, he said. The words were quiet, but they carried something deeper. Hannah frowned. You live here? Yeah. Then what do you mean? Caleb exhaled slowly. My body's here, he said. Doesn't mean the rest of me is. Hannah felt the meaning before she fully understood the words. You mean, she started. Caleb nodded once. Some days are better than others. The understatement was almost invisible, but it was there. Hannah looked at Atlas. The dog remained still, calm, his presence steady. You said he saved your life, she said. Caleb's hand moved again, resting more firmly against Atlas's neck. More than once. Hannah's voice softened. What happened? Caleb's gaze went distant for just a moment. Then he brought it back. Mission went bad, he said. Didn't go the way it was supposed to. Hannah didn't push. She didn't need the details. She could see enough. Atlas found me, Caleb continued. Got me out. Hannah swallowed. And after that? Caleb's mouth tightened slightly. After that, I came back. The same phrase. But now she understood what he meant. He had come back physically, but not completely. Hannah nodded slowly. And Daniel gave you something to do, she said. Caleb looked at her. Yeah. Something to focus on. Something that mattered. The room fell quiet again. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It was shared. Hannah looked down at the box, at the tools, at the maps, at the life her husband had built in secret, and the man standing in front of her, the one who had helped him, the one he had trusted, not with everything, but with enough. You're still here, she said. Caleb nodded. Yeah. Even now. Yeah. Hannah took a slow breath. And Atlas? Caleb's hand rested gently against the dog's side. He stays where I go. Hannah looked at the two of them. The man who carried something he couldn't fully leave behind. The dog who never left him. And suddenly, the pieces began to fit in a way she hadn't expected. Daniel hadn't just built a system. He had built a team. Not in the traditional sense, but in something quieter, stronger, more lasting. Hannah closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. What happens now? She asked. Caleb didn't hesitate this time. Now, he said, you decide if you're staying. The question hung between them. Simple, but not easy. Hannah looked around the cabin, at the fireplace, at the hidden compartment, at the table where the box still rested, at the place her husband had prepared for her without ever telling her. Then she looked back at Caleb. "I didn't come all this way to leave," she said. Caleb held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Good." Hannah frowned slightly. "Why?" Caleb glanced toward the window again. The forest beyond was darker now, deeper, less forgiving. "Because if you're here," he said quietly, "then it means we're going to need you." The words settled into the silence, and for the first time, Hannah understood something she hadn't been ready to face before. This wasn't just about the past. It was about what was coming. The thought stayed with Hannah long after Caleb left the cabin that night. The fire she had managed to start crackled low in the stone hearth, casting shifting shadows along the wooden walls. Atlas had remained for a while lying near the door, his presence steady and grounding. But even he had eventually risen, pausing only once to glance back at her as before slipping quietly into the dark to follow Caleb. And then Hannah was alone again. But not in the same way she had been before. She sat at the table, the notebook open in front of her, the maps spread beside it. The silence pressed in, but it no longer felt empty. It felt watchful, as if the valley itself was listening. She read late into the night, page after page, diagram after diagram. Slowly, the patterns began to make sense. The system wasn't just about redirecting water. It was layered, strategic. A network of channels buried beneath the forest floor, designed to move water in controlled ways, away from detection, away from predictable flow patterns. It was designed to hide something, or rather, to make something appear as if it wasn't there at all. By the time the fire burned low and the cold crept back into the cabin, Hannah leaned back in her chair, her eyes tired, but her mind sharper than it had been in months. Daniel hadn't just built this for survival. He had built it for protection, which meant someone, somewhere, would eventually come looking. Morning came slowly, a pale gray light filtering through the trees, settling gently across the cabin floor. Hannah stepped outside just after sunrise. The air was crisp, biting slightly at her skin, but clean in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. She drew in a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs. The valley below was quiet. Smoke rose faintly from a few chimneys, thin trails dissolving into the cold morning air. It looked peaceful, still, unchanged. But Hannah knew better now. She made her way down the path toward the settlement. This time she didn't feel like an outsider. Not entirely. But she still felt observed. The same man she had seen the day before stood near the same cabin, his posture relaxed, but his gaze attentive. The older woman was there too, near a small structure that now looked more clearly like a general store. They didn't approach her, but they didn't ignore her either. Hannah nodded as she passed. The man gave a slight nod in return. Acknowledgement. Nothing more. The diner sat near the center of the clearing, a modest building with a wooden sign that read simply, Carter's. Hannah stepped inside. The warmth hit her first, then the smell of coffee. Strong, fresh. Behind the counter stood the same woman she had seen briefly the day before. Up close, Hannah could see the lines in her face. Age, yes, but also strength. "You came back," the woman said. Hannah managed a small smile. "I guess I did." The woman poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug and set it in front of her without asking. Hannah wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat sink into her fingers. "I'm Evelyn," the woman said. Hannah. Evelyn nodded. I know. The words came without hesitation. Hannah let out a quiet breath. Everyone here seems to. Evelyn leaned lightly against the counter. This place doesn't get many new faces, she said. We notice. Hannah took a sip of her coffee. It was hot, grounding. My husband, she started, then paused. Daniel. He came here. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. Yeah, she said. He did. Hannah looked up. You knew him? Evelyn gave a small nod. Not like Caleb did, but enough. Hannah hesitated. Did he ever talk about me? Evelyn studied her for a moment. Not much, she said. But he didn't need to. Hannah frowned slightly. What does that mean? Evelyn's lips curved faintly. It means the way he talked about things. You were already part of it. Hannah felt something shift in her chest. Not pain. Not quite. Something quieter. She looked down at her coffee again. He kept a lot from me, she said softly. Evelyn didn't argue. No, she said. He did. Hannah waited. But he wasn't hiding from you, Evelyn added. There's a difference. Hannah glanced up. Then what was he doing? Evelyn held her gaze. Protecting something. The words echoed what Caleb had said. Hannah nodded slowly. Yeah, she said. I think I'm starting to understand that. The door opened behind her. A rush of cold air followed. Hannah turned slightly. A man stepped inside, brushing dust from his jacket. Younger than Caleb. Early 30s, maybe. Broad-shouldered, with a steady, grounded presence. His eyes moved quickly around the room, landing on Hannah for just a moment before shifting away. Morning, Evelyn, he said. Jack, Evelyn replied. He nodded toward Hannah. You knew? Hannah met his gaze. Something like that. Jack studied her for a second longer than necessary, then nodded once. Welcome, he said. The word sounded simple, but not casual. He moved to a table near the window and sat down. Hannah watched him briefly. People here don't say much, she said. Evelyn poured more coffee. They say what matters. Hannah turned back to her mug. And what doesn't? Evelyn shrugged slightly. They keep to themselves. The conversation settled into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just measured. Hannah finished her coffee and stood. Thanks, she said. Evelyn nodded. You'll be back. It wasn't a question. Hannah stepped outside again. The sun had climbed higher now, casting light across the valley, softening its edges. It looked peaceful, almost untouched. But as she walked back toward the path leading up to the cabin, something caught her eye. Movement. At the far edge of the clearing. A vehicle. Dark. Not one of the trucks she had seen before. Sleeker. Cleaner. Out of place. It sat near the tree line, partially obscured by shadows. Two men stood beside it, talking quietly. Hannah slowed. Something about them felt wrong. Not aggressive, not obvious, but different. Their posture, their stillness, their attention. They weren't looking at the buildings. They were looking at the land. Measuring, observing. The way Caleb did, but without the restraint. One of them glanced up. Their eyes met. Just for a second. Then he looked away. But not before Hannah saw it. Recognition. Not of her. Of something else, too. something they expected to find. A cold feeling settled into her chest. She turned and continued walking, her pace steady but her mind racing. By the time she reached the cabin, Caleb was already there, standing near the porch, watching the same direction. "You saw them," he said. Hannah nodded. "Who are they?" Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "Trouble," he said. Hannah stepped closer. "That's not an answer. It's the one that matters right now." Hannah crossed her arms. "They don't look like they're just passing through." "They're not." Hannah felt her pulse quicken. "They're here for something." Caleb glanced at her. "Yeah." Hannah's voice dropped. "For the water." Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence confirmed it. Hannah looked back toward the valley, toward the vehicle, toward the men who didn't belong. The peaceful image of the place shifted in her mind. Not gone, but layered with something else. Something hidden, something fragile, something worth protecting. She turned back to Caleb. "What do we do?" Caleb's gaze moved briefly to the trees, then back to her. "We wait," he said. Hannah frowned. "For what?" Caleb's expression hardened slightly. "For them to make the first move." The wind picked up, moving through the trees with a low, steady sound. Hannah felt it brush against her, cold and sharp, and for the first time since she arrived, the valley didn't just feel watchful, it felt like it was holding its breath. The wind died down as quickly as it had risen, leaving the trees still again. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was tight, like something unseen had shifted just beneath the surface. Hannah stood beside Caleb on the porch, her eyes fixed on the distant clearing where the unfamiliar vehicle had been. It was gone now, but the feeling it left behind hadn't gone with it. "They'll come back," she said. Caleb didn't look at her. "Yeah." His voice carried no doubt. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from something deeper, a sense that the valley she had just begun to understand was already changing. "When?" she asked. Caleb's eyes moved slowly along the tree line, scanning. "Soon." The word settled hard. Atlas appeared from behind the cabin, moving at a controlled pace. His head was low, ears forward, his body language sharper than Hannah had seen before. Focused, alert. He didn't come to her. He moved past them, stopping at the edge of the trees, his gaze locked on something invisible to her. Caleb noticed immediately. "What is it?" Hannah asked. Caleb stepped off the porch, moving toward the dog. Atlas didn't move. He stood still, listening. Then, a low sound, barely audible, a warning. Hannah felt her pulse spike. "Someone's out there," she whispered. Caleb didn't answer. He crouched beside Atlas, his hand resting lightly along the dog's back. "Easy," he said quietly. Atlas didn't relax, but he didn't advance either. After a long moment, Caleb stood. "They're not coming in now," he said, "just watching." Hannah's stomach tightened. "That's worse." Caleb glanced at her. "Yeah." The day passed slowly after that. Too slowly. Every sound carried further than it should. Every movement in the trees felt deliberate. Hannah tried to focus on the cabin, on the notebook, on understanding the system Daniel had built. But her attention kept drifting. Back to the forest. Back to the unseen. By evening, the light began to fade again, casting long shadows across the clearing. Caleb hadn't left. He stayed near the cabin, moving quietly, checking things Hannah didn't fully understand. Points along the tree line, the slope behind the structure, the path leading down toward the valley. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Hannah could see it. Preparation. Atlas stayed close, never straying far from Caleb's side. But his behavior had changed. He didn't rest. He watched. Constantly. As the last of the daylight slipped behind the mountains, Caleb stepped onto the porch. "You should get some rest," he said. Hannah let out a short breath. "I don't think I'm going to sleep." Caleb nodded slightly. "Then stay inside." The tone was firm, not controlling, protective. Hannah hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Caleb stepped back into the darkness, disappearing into the tree line with Atlas close behind him. Hannah watched them go, then turned and closed the cabin door. The lock clicked into place. The sound felt louder than usual. Final. She moved through the cabin slowly, lighting a lantern and setting it on the table. The soft glow pushed back the shadows just enough to make the space feel contained, but not safe. She sat down, opening the notebook again, forcing herself to focus. Pages, diagrams, flow patterns. Her eyes moved across them, but her mind kept drifting. Back to the valley, back to the men, back to the feeling that something had already begun. Time passed. Minutes. Hours. She wasn't sure. The fire burned low again, the room cooling slightly as the night deepened. And then, a sound. Sharp. Close. Hannah froze. Her head snapped toward the door. Silence followed. Then, a faint creak from outside. Her heart began to pound. "No," she whispered. Another sound, this time from the side of the cabin. A footstep. Soft. Careful. Hannah stood slowly, her body tense. "Caleb?" she called quietly. No answer. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. Then, the handle on the door moved, just slightly. Testing. Hannah stepped back, her breath shallow. The handle stopped. Then, the sound of something sliding along the wood. Metal. Tools. Her chest tightened. "They're here!" The realization hit hard. Before she could react, the window shattered. Glass exploded inward with a sharp crack, scattering across the floor. Hannah gasped, stumbling backward. A figure moved through the opening, fast, controlled. Another followed behind him, both wearing dark clothing, faces partially covered. Not rushed, not chaotic, deliberate. They knew what they were doing. "What do you want?" Hannah shouted, her voice shaking but loud. The first man didn't answer. His eyes scanned the room quickly, then landed on the table. The notebook, the maps, the box. He moved toward it immediately. Hannah stepped forward instinctively. "No." Before she could reach him, a blur of motion. Atlas. He came through the broken window like a force of nature, his body low and fast, teeth bared. He hit the second man first, hard. The man stumbled back with a shout, losing his balance as Atlas drove into him, knocking him against the wall. The first man turned sharply, reaching for something at his sit-down sound. Caleb was already there. He came through the door, moving fast, controlled, precise. His movements were sharp, efficient, no hesitation, no wasted motion. He grabbed the first man's arm, twisting it just enough to force him off balance, then drove him backward into the table. The wood cracked under the impact. The notebook slid to the floor. "Get out," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. The man struggled, trying to regain footing. Atlas held the second man pinned, a low growl vibrating through his chest, his teeth inches from the man's throat. "Call him off," the second man shouted. Caleb didn't look at him. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. The first man shoved back, breaking free just enough to move. "Grab it," he shouted to the other. Atlas lunged. The second man barely pulled back in time, scrambling toward the window. Caleb stepped forward again, but the first man had already moved, grabbing the edge of the table and pulling himself toward the opening. "Move!" he barked. They retreated quickly, not panicked, not sloppy, disciplined. Within seconds, both men were gone, disappearing back into the darkness of the trees. Atlas followed to the window, barking once, sharp, controlled, then stopped, waiting, listening. Caleb moved to the door, stepping outside briefly, scanning the area. Then he came back in. "They're gone," he said. Hannah stood frozen in the center of the room. The broken glass, the overturned table, the scattered papers, her chest rising and falling too fast. "They knew exactly where to look," she said. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah." Hannah's voice dropped. "They weren't guessing." "No." She looked at the notebook on the floor, at the maps, at the box, her husband's work. "They're not just watching anymore," she said. Caleb's gaze hardened. "No," he said. "They're hunting." Atlas returned to her side, his breathing steady now, his body still tense but controlled. Hannah reached down slowly, her hand resting against his neck. He leaned into it slightly, alive, strong, present. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They're not going to stop." Caleb didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "They're not." The cabin fell silent again, but it was no longer waiting. It had already been found. The cabin stood in quiet disarray, glass scattered across the floor. The table shifted out of place, papers strewn like fragments of something once hidden, now exposed. Hannah stood in the middle of it, her breathing slowly returning to something steady. Atlas remained close, his body still alert, his ears twitching at every distant sound. But he no longer lunged, no longer growled. He watched, just like Caleb. Caleb moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, resetting what he could. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He simply restored order in small, controlled ways, picking up the fallen chair, moving the table back into place, checking the door, then the broken window. "They weren't here to hurt you," he said. Hannah looked at him. "They broke in through a window." Caleb nodded. "Yeah, but they went for the table first, not you." Hannah followed his gaze. The notebook, the maps, the box. "They knew what they were looking for," she said. "Exactly." Hannah crouched down slowly, gathering the scattered pages with careful hands. Her fingers brushed over Daniel's handwriting again, and this time it felt different. Not distant, not memory, immediate, present. "They didn't take anything," she said. Caleb stepped closer. "They didn't have time." Hannah looked up. "They'll come back." Caleb didn't answer, because he didn't need to. Hannah stood holding the notebook tightly against her chest. "We're missing something," she said. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "They came straight for this," she said, gesturing to the table. "They knew where to look. They knew what mattered." Caleb nodded slowly. "Yeah. So how?" Hannah pressed. "How did they know?" The question hung in the air, heavy, unanswered. Then Atlas moved, suddenly, deliberately. He stepped away from Hannah, crossing the room with purpose, heading not toward the broken window, but toward the fireplace. He stopped in front of it, still, focused. Hannah frowned. "What is it?" Atlas lowered his head, then scratched. Once, twice, in the same place. The hidden compartment. Hannah's breath caught. "We already opened that," she said. Atlas didn't move, didn't look at her, just stayed there, insistent. Caleb stepped closer, his gaze sharpening. "Move the stone," he said quietly. Hannah hesitated for only a second before kneeling and pulling the stone free again. The compartment opened, empty. Or so it had seemed before. Atlas leaned in, his nose moving along the back edge. Then, he nudged. Hard. Hannah felt something shift. Not the compartment itself, something inside it, hidden deeper. "Wait," she said. She reached further in this time, her arm extending past where she had stopped before. Her fingers brushed against something. Paper, thin, folded tightly. Her pulse quickened. She pulled it out. A sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. Her name written across the front. Hannah. Her breath stopped. "This wasn't in the box," she whispered. Caleb stepped closer, his expression tightening. "No," he said. "It wasn't." Hannah stared at the envelope. Her name, in Daniel's handwriting. Clear, intentional, personal. "This is for me," she said. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah." Her hands trembled slightly as she turned it over. The seal was intact, unbroken, waiting. She looked up at Caleb. "Why hide it separately?" Caleb didn't answer right away. "Because this wasn't part of the system," he said finally. "This was for you, not for anyone else." Hannah swallowed, then carefully broke the seal. The sound was soft, final. She unfolded the letter slowly, smoothing it out with her fingers. Her eyes moved across the page. The first line, and everything inside her shifted. "Hannah, if you're reading this, then it means you found your way here." Her breath caught. She read on. "I wanted to tell you about this place, about everything I've been doing here. But I couldn't. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I knew what it would mean if you knew." Hannah felt her chest tighten. "You would have felt responsible, and I didn't want to give you that weight until the moment it became necessary." Her vision blurred slightly, but she didn't stop. "This valley, what's beneath it? It's rare. Not just valuable, important. The kind of thing that doesn't stay hidden forever. And when people find it, they won't see it the way we do. They'll see it as something to take." Hannah's fingers tightened on the page. "I met Caleb when he needed something to hold on to. He didn't say it, but I could see it. And I trusted him, not because he was perfect, but because he understood what it meant to protect something without being asked." Her breath slowed. Atlas saved his life, more than once. That dog doesn't walk away from what he's meant to guard. Hannah glanced briefly at Atlas. He stood quietly beside her. Steady, unshaken. "The system I built, it's not just to manage the water. It's to hide it, to protect it, and to keep it out of the hands of people who won't understand its value." Hannah's heart pounded, but I couldn't finish it. Her eyes widened. "Not completely. There's one part, one control point, that I left unfinished." Her grip tightened on the paper. "Because it needed to be yours." The words seemed to echo. Not his, hers. You'll know what to do when the time comes. I trust that more than anything. Hannah felt something break open inside her. Not grief, something deeper. Something steadier. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but I knew that if you ever came here, it meant you were ready. Her breath trembled. I love you. Always. Daniel. The cabin fell silent again, but it wasn't the same silence. Hannah lowered the letter slowly. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear, from understanding. He left it for me, she said. Caleb nodded. Yeah. He knew this would happen. Yeah. Hannah looked down at the notebook, at the maps, at everything Daniel had built, and then at the line in the letter. There's one part, one control point, that I left unfinished. Her voice dropped. What part? Caleb met her eyes. That's what we need to find out. Hannah's pulse quickened. They're already looking for it. Caleb nodded. Which means we don't have much time. Atlas shifted beside her, his posture tightening again, his attention moving toward the door. Listening. Always listening. Hannah folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat before placing it inside her jacket. Close. Protected. She looked at Caleb. I'm not leaving, she said. Caleb held her gaze. I know. Hannah took a slow breath. Then we finish what he started. The words felt solid, unshakable. Caleb nodded once. Yeah, he said. We do. Outside, the wind picked up again, moving through the trees with a low, steady sound. And this time, it didn't feel like the valley was holding its breath. It felt like something had already begun to move. Morning came faster than Hannah expected, not because she slept, but because she didn't. She sat at the table most of the night, the letter folded carefully beside her, the notebook open again, her eyes tracing Daniel's diagrams over and over until the lines stopped feeling foreign. By the time the first light broke across the ridge, something inside her had changed. Not completely, but enough. The confusion had narrowed, the fear had sharpened, and in its place, focus. Caleb returned just after sunrise. Atlas moved ahead of him, stepping through the broken window frame without hesitation, landing lightly on the wooden floor. His eyes moved immediately to Hannah, checking, confirming. She gave a small nod. I'm okay. Atlas relaxed slightly. Not fully. Never fully. Caleb stepped inside behind him, carrying a small pack over his shoulder. His movements were tighter than usual, controlled, but urgent. They're back, he said. Hannah stood. Where? Lower ridge, Caleb replied. Near the east slope. Hannah's pulse spiked. That's on the map. Yeah. Caleb dropped the pack on the table and pulled out a folded sheet, one of Daniel's maps, marked more heavily than the others. They're setting up equipment, he said. Scanning. Hannah stepped closer, her eyes moving across the markings. This is where the flow converges, she said. Caleb nodded. If they find it, they won't stop. The words came out steady, certain. Hannah looked at the map again, at the lines, at the symbols, at the one section that stood apart, unfinished. Her breath slowed. This is it, she said. Caleb glanced at her. What? The control point, Hannah said, tapping the map. The one he didn't finish. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. You're sure? Hannah nodded. He designed everything around it, but he left this part open, unlocked. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then that's where they're headed. Hannah felt the weight of it settle. They don't know how it works yet, she said. But they're close enough to find out. Caleb grabbed his jacket. Then we move now. Hannah looked at him. Together. Caleb didn't argue. Atlas was already at the door. Ready. They moved fast. Out of the cabin. Into the trees. The forest felt different now. No longer quiet. Alive. Every branch crack, every shift of wind carried meaning. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, sloping upward as they climbed, the air thinning slightly with the elevation. Hannah struggled at first to keep pace. Caleb adjusted without saying anything, slowing just enough to keep her with him without losing momentum. Atlas led, always a few steps ahead, his nose low, his body cutting through the terrain with practiced precision. They moved along a narrow path barely visible to the untrained eye. Daniel showed me this route, Caleb said quietly. It keeps us off the main line. Hannah nodded, focusing on her footing. How far? Half mile. They climbed in silence after that, until a sound, low, mechanical. Hannah froze. What is that? Caleb stopped beside her, listening. Equipment, he said. Ground scanners. Atlas stiffened, his body angled forward, ears locked. He moved slowly now, carefully. Caleb raised a hand. Stay close. They advanced the last stretch at a slower pace, keeping low as the trees began to thin. Then, they saw it. A clearing along the ridge. 2 vehicles. Dark, industrial. Equipment set up in a grid pattern across the ground. Cables running between devices. Screens flickering with data. 3 men moved between them. Focused. Efficient. Unaware. Not yet. Hannah's breath caught. They're already running scans. Caleb nodded. They're mapping the ground. Atlas let out a low, almost silent sound. Caleb rested a hand briefly on his back. Not yet, he whispered. Hannah's eyes moved across the clearing. Then, she saw it. A metal post, half buried near the edge of the slope, weathered, almost invisible against the rock. Her pulse surged. That's it, she whispered. Caleb followed her gaze. Control point? Hannah nodded. That's where it connects. Caleb studied the area. They're close. Too close. Hannah's hand moved to her necklace. The pendant. The key. She felt its weight now in a way she never had before. We need to activate it, she said. Caleb looked at her. Now? Hannah nodded. If they finish scanning, it won't matter what we do after. Caleb hesitated. Not long. Just enough to measure the risk. Then, okay. Atlas shifted forward, ready. Caleb gave a small signal. The dog moved, low, fast, circling wide through the trees, positioning himself behind the clearing. Caleb turned back to Hannah. We go straight in, he said. Stay behind me. Hannah nodded. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Ready? She took a breath. Yes. They moved, out of the trees, into the open. The first man noticed immediately. Hey! Caleb didn't slow. Step away from the equipment, he said, his voice sharp, controlled. The men froze, not confused, alert. One of them reached toward his belt. Caleb's posture shifted instantly. Don't, he said. The word stopped him. For a second, that was all they needed. Hannah broke toward the post. The metal structure stood firm, half hidden beneath layers of dirt and stone. Her hands moved quickly, clearing it. There. A slot. Exact. Perfect. She pulled the pendant free, opening it with practiced motion. The key slid into her fingers. Her breath caught. Come on. Behind her, voices rose. Stop her! Movement. Fast. Atlas exploded from the trees, a blur of motion and sound. He hit one of the men hard, knocking him off balance, driving him back away from the equipment. Caleb moved at the same time, intercepting another before he could close the distance. Hannah didn't look back. She couldn't. Her hands found the slot. The key slid in. Perfect fit. She turned it. Once. Resistance. Then, a shift. She turned it again. The ground beneath her feet vibrated slightly. A low sound rose from below. Water. Moving. Redirecting. She turned it a third time. The system engaged fully. Deep beneath the ridge, unseen channels opened, flow patterns shifting, rerouting the water away from the scanning grid. The sound wasn't loud, but it was powerful, controlled, deliberate. Behind her, the men shouted. What the hell did she do? The equipment flickered, readings changed, data collapsed. No signal. Caleb stepped back, his eyes on the screens. It's working, he said. Hannah pulled the key free, her chest heaving. The ground settled. The sound faded. But the change remained. The system was active, hidden, protected. Atlas returned to her side, breathing hard but steady, his body still ready. Caleb moved beside her. They're pulling back, he said. The men were already retreating, confusion replacing certainty as they scrambled to shut down their equipment. One of them looked back, at Hannah, at Caleb, at the ridge, but he didn't understand what he was seeing. Not yet. They left. Fast. Frustrated. Gone. Silence returned to the ridge. But it wasn't the same. Hannah stood there, her hands still shaking slightly. Is it over? She asked. Caleb shook his head. No. Atlas pressed lightly against her leg. Grounding. Present. Hannah looked down at him, then back at the ridge, at the place Daniel had trusted her to find, to activate, to protect. Her voice was quiet. But it started. Caleb nodded. Yeah, he said. Now it has. The ridge fell quiet again. The kind of quiet that follows something irreversible. Hannah stood where she was, the key still warm in her hand, her chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. The wind moved softly across the slope, brushing through the trees as if nothing had happened. But everything had. Below them, the clearing was already empty. The vehicles were gone. The equipment packed up in haste. The men who had come looking for something valuable had left with nothing. Nothing they could understand. Caleb stepped forward slowly, his eyes scanning the ridge, then the surrounding tree line. His posture didn't relax. Not fully. Not yet. They'll be back, he said. Hannah nodded. I know. But her voice didn't carry fear the way it had before. Something had shifted. She looked down at the ground where she had turned the key. This is what he built, she said quietly. Caleb followed her gaze. Yeah. To hide it. Yeah. Hannah let out a slow breath. And now it's hidden. For now. The words settled between them. Temporary. Nothing about this was permanent. Atlas moved beside them, his breathing steady but heavier than before. Hannah noticed it now, the slight stiffness in his movement, the way he shifted his weight just a little more carefully than usual. She crouched beside him. "Hey," she said softly. Atlas looked at her. His eyes were clear, focused, but there was something else there now. Strain. Hannah's hand moved gently along his side. Her fingers found it. A tear in his fur, darker beneath. Caleb. Caleb stepped closer immediately. "What is it?" "He's hurt." Caleb knelt beside them, his expression tightening as he examined the wound. It wasn't deep, but it wasn't nothing either. A sharp edge, maybe from the broken equipment, maybe from the struggle. Atlas didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He just stayed still. Caleb exhaled slowly. "It's not bad," he said. "But we need to clean it." Hannah nodded. "We should get back." Caleb looked toward the ridge one more time, then back at her. "Yeah." The walk down was slower. Not rushed, not tense, but heavier. The adrenaline had faded, leaving something quieter behind. The weight of what had just happened. The understanding of what it meant. Atlas walked between them, steady despite the injury, his head high, his focus still sharp. Hannah stayed close to him, her hand brushing lightly against his back every few steps, grounding, reassuring, for both of them. By the time they reached the cabin, the light had begun to soften again, the sun lowering behind the mountains. The broken window still gaped open. The signs of the night before still lingered. But now it felt different. Not like a place that had been invaded, like a place that had been defended. Caleb moved inside first, clearing the space with a quick, practiced sweep. "All clear." Hannah followed, guiding Atlas toward the table. "Come here," she said gently. Atlas obeyed immediately, stepping up beside her. Caleb pulled supplies from his pack, clean cloth, water, antiseptic. He worked quickly but carefully, his hands steady as he cleaned the wound. Atlas didn't move, didn't resist, just watched, calm, trusting. Hannah knelt beside him, her hand resting lightly against his neck. "You're okay," she whispered. Atlas's ears shifted slightly. He leaned into her touch. Caleb finished wrapping the wound, securing it firmly. "He'll be fine," he said. "He's had worse." Hannah glanced at him. "I believe that." Caleb sat back slightly, his shoulders easing for the first time since they had left the ridge. For a moment, none of them spoke. The fire crackled softly. The air inside the cabin warmed, and slowly. The tension began to settle. Hannah leaned back against the chair, her body finally registering the exhaustion she had been pushing aside. "That's it then?" she said quietly. "They didn't find anything?" Caleb shook his head. "No." Hannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They came all this way and left with nothing." Caleb's expression didn't soften. "Not nothing." Hannah looked at him. "They know something's here now," he said. The words landed heavier than anything else that day. Hannah's relief faded. "They'll come back." "Yeah." "With more." "Yeah." Hannah closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "But they won't find it," she said. Caleb studied her. "Not if we do this right." Hannah nodded. "We did what he planned." "Part of it." Hannah frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Caleb stood, moving toward the table where the notebook still lay. He flipped it open, scanning the pages quickly. "Daniel didn't just build one control point," he said. "He built a system." Hannah stood, stepping beside him. "You think there's more?" Caleb nodded. "Adjustments, seasonal changes, backup routes." Hannah looked down at the diagrams again, The complexity, the layers. He expected this, she said. Yeah. He planned for it. Yeah. Hannah felt it settle again. The quiet certainty. Daniel hadn't just prepared for her to find this. He had prepared for this moment, for the people who would come looking, for the day everything would be tested. Hannah's voice dropped. He trusted me to finish it. Caleb didn't argue, because he didn't need to. The truth of it was already clear. Atlas shifted beside them, lowering himself carefully onto the floor. Hannah glanced down at him. You did good, she said softly. Atlas looked at her, then rested his head on his paws, finally allowing himself to rest. Caleb watched him for a moment. He always does. Hannah looked back at Caleb. And you? Caleb frowned slightly. What about me? You stayed, she said. Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at the fire, at the cabin, at the place he had guarded for years. I didn't have anywhere else to go, he said. Hannah shook her head slightly. That's not the same thing. Caleb's gaze shifted back to her. For a moment, something in his expression changed. Not fully, but enough. No, he said quietly. It's not. The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't tense. It was earned. They had done something. Something that mattered. Something no one else would ever see. Hannah leaned back in her chair, her eyes drifting toward the window, where the last light of day was fading into night. They'll never know, she said. Caleb followed her gaze. Not if we do this right. Hannah nodded slowly. The valley would look the same, peaceful, unchanged. But beneath it, everything had shifted, and only a few people would ever understand why. She looked down at Atlas one more time, at the dog who had fought without hesitation, who had guided her, protected her, stayed. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He saved us. Caleb nodded. Yeah. The fire crackled softly. The night settled in, and for the first time since she had arrived, Hannah didn't feel lost. She felt part of something. The realization didn't come all at once. It settled in slowly, like the morning light that crept across the valley days later, quiet, steady, undeniable. Hannah stood on the porch of the cabin, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since cooled. The air was crisp, the kind that carried the scent of pine and earth, of something old and rooted. Below her, the valley stretched out in soft layers of green and shadow. Smoke curled from a few chimneys. A truck moved slowly along the dirt road, its tires kicking up dust that faded just as quickly as it rose. Everything looked the same, untouched. But she knew better now. She always would. Behind her, the cabin had changed too, not in structure, but in meaning. The broken window had been repaired, the table set back into place, the scattered pages gathered, ordered, understood. The system Daniel built was no longer a mystery. It was a responsibility. And it was hers. Footsteps approached from behind. Caleb stepped onto the porch, quieter than the boards beneath him. He carried himself differently now, not entirely free of the weight he bore, but less distant, less guarded. Atlas followed at his side. The bandage was gone. The wound had healed, not perfectly, but enough. Hannah turned slightly, a small smile forming without effort. Morning. Caleb nodded. Morning. Atlas moved past him, stopping beside Hannah. He leaned gently against her leg, his presence steady and familiar. She reached down, her hand resting against his head. "You're getting stronger," she said softly. Atlas's tail moved once. Caleb watched them for a moment. "He always does," he said. Hannah glanced back at him. "And you?" Caleb exhaled quietly, his gaze drifting out over the valley. "I'm working on it." The honesty in the words lingered. Hannah nodded. "That's enough." They stood in silence for a while. Not the kind that needed to be filled. The kind that meant something had already been said. Eventually, Caleb spoke again. "They pulled out yesterday." Hannah looked at him. "The company?" Caleb nodded. "Packed everything up. No findings. No follow-up scheduled." Hannah let out a slow breath. So they believed it. For now. The words were familiar. Temporary. Always temporary. Hannah looked back out at the valley. "They'll send someone else eventually." "Yeah. And we'll be ready." Caleb glanced at her. "You're staying." It wasn't a question anymore. Hannah shook her head slightly. "I didn't come here to run," she said. Caleb nodded. "No." Hannah's fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "I came here because I thought I needed to be alone." She paused. "But I wasn't," she added. Her eyes moved toward Atlas, then back to Caleb. "I just didn't know it yet." Caleb didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted again. Subtle, but real. The distance between them had changed. Not gone, but smaller. Later that day, Hannah walked down into the valley again. This time, no one watched her like a stranger. Evelyn greeted her with a nod behind the counter. Jack raised a hand from his usual seat by the window. Others, faces she had only seen in passing before, acknowledged her in small, quiet ways. No questions, no explanations, just acceptance, as if something had already been decided. Hannah understood it now. This place didn't rush. It waited. And when it recognized something, it held on to it. By the time she returned to the cabin, the sun was low again, casting long shadows across the ridge. Caleb was already there, standing near the tree line, watching. Atlas beside him, always beside him. Hannah stepped up onto the porch and paused. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just watched them, the man and the dog, moving along the edge of the forest, checking, protecting, not out of duty alone, but because it mattered, because it meant something. She felt it clearly now. Daniel hadn't left her behind. He hadn't hidden this life from her to keep her out of it. He had prepared it. For her. For the moment she would need it. For the moment she would understand. Hannah stepped forward slightly, her voice quiet. "He knew I'd come." Caleb glanced back at her. "Yeah." Hannah looked out at the trees again. "At the right time." Caleb nodded once. "Yeah." The sun dipped lower, the light softening into gold as it spread across the valley. Atlas paused at the edge of the forest, his ears lifting slightly as he listened to something distant. Then he turned, looking back toward Hannah. Just for a second. Then he moved again. Caleb followed. Hannah stood on the porch, watching them. Not as an outsider, not as someone passing through, but as someone who belonged. The wind moved gently through the trees. The valley breathed. And for the first time in a long time, Hannah Whitaker didn't feel like she was searching for something. She felt like she had found it. If you believe some things in life are worth protecting, no matter the cost, type yes in the comments below. And if stories like this speak to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more waiting for you just down the road.